The thing about stairwells is that everyone believes they're private. They're not, of course. They're concrete, acoustic chambers with ventilation systems that were designed in the 1970s by engineers who were thinking about airflow and not at all about the emotional privacy of building occupants. But they feel private. They feel like the kind of space that the rest of the world can't reach you, and sometimes that feeling is the only thing that matters. I found out about the ventilation quirk on my third day at Vantage Group when I overheard a very detailed argument between two senior analysts about a client report that had gone wrong. I was in the east stairwell, eating my lunch, because the break room was loud and the courtyard was cold and I needed 20 minutes of not being visible. The argument came through the overhead vent with the clarity of a radio broadcast, every word intact, every frustrated pause. I filed the information away. I stopped eating lunch in the stairwell. I started using it for phone calls instead, because knowing about the quirk meant I could account for it. I always faced away from the vent, kept my voice low, and never said anything I wouldn't want repeated. I thought that was sufficient. My name is Ren Ashby. I am 25 years old. I have worked as executive coordinator at Vantage Group for almost 2 years, and it turns out that facing away from the vent only helps if the problem is horizontal transmission. Vertical transmission sound traveling upward through the shaft to the floor above is a different matter entirely, and it is not something I accounted for when I stepped into the east stairwell at 11:42 on a Tuesday morning and answered a call from my boyfriend. Former boyfriend. As of 11:47, Nate's voice was calm when he started. That should have been my first warning. Nate at his most composed was Nate at his most decided, and Nate fully decided was a door that didn't reopen. Hey, I need to say something, and I need you to just listen. Okay, I said. I was already pressing myself into the corner by the landing, my free hand finding the cold metal railing. Okay, this isn't working for me. You're a good person, Ren, and I mean that sincerely, but good isn't enough. I need someone who, he paused, searching for words with the specific care of someone who had rehearsed this and was now departing from the script. I need someone who fills a room. When I walk into a place with you, you disappear. You just become part of the background. You're quiet, and you're careful, and you're reliable, and those are fine qualities, but they don't make me feel anything. You don't make me feel anything. I've been waiting for it to change, and it hasn't changed. I didn't say anything. I need more than fine, Nate continued. I need someone who's actually exciting to be around. I'm sorry, but I think we both know this is the honest thing. My thumbnail was pressed into my palm hard enough to leave a crescent mark. The concrete wall was very cold through my shirt. Okay, I said again. A pause. That's it? Okay? What do you want me to say? I don't know. Something. You're not even upset, are you? You're doing that thing where you go completely flat and handle it. That's exactly what I mean, Ren. A normal person would... I'm gonna hang up now, I said. I hung up. I stood in the stairwell for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I know this because I was watching the timer on my phone, which was something I did when I needed to give myself a bounded amount of time to fall apart, a known container, a defined duration, so that the falling apart didn't expand to fill everything available. 4 minutes and 11 seconds of pressing my back into the concrete and letting my eyes sting and my breath do the thing where it comes in small, ragged increments that don't feel like they're achieving anything. 4 minutes of Nate's words arranging and rearranging themselves in my head. You disappear. You become part of the background. You don't make me feel anything. Fine qualities. I had fine qualities. When the timer hit 4 minutes, I straightened up. I smoothed my jacket. I checked my reflection in the dark glass of the fire door window, eyes slightly too bright, jaw slightly too tight, otherwise presentable. I had a meeting at noon with the Callaway account and 40 minutes of prep work I hadn't finished, and Vantage Group did not stop running because Ren Ashby had been told he was fine. I opened the fire door and walked back to my desk. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that the ventilation shaft in the east stairwell runs vertically from the 3rd floor to the 22nd, and that the executive coordination floor sits at 19, and that the 22nd floor is the executive suite, and that the vent that terminates on the executive floor is positioned at the junction of 3 different spaces: the corridor outside the strategy room, the entrance to the executive fitness room, and the open section of the east wing where Lionel Voss's desk occupies the corner. I didn't know any of that. I know it now. Derek Voss, heard me from the corridor outside the strategy room. He had just finished a 40-minute meeting about the Mercer acquisition and was heading toward the water station at the end of the hall, thinking about the valuation discrepancy in page 14 of the analyst report, when my voice came through the overhead vent with the quality of something intimate arriving in the wrong place. He stopped walking. He stood in the corridor for the full duration of the call. He did not intend to listen. He intended to move away from the vent and continue to the water station. He did not do this. He listened to 4 minutes and 47 seconds of a person being reduced to a word fine and told that the problem was the absence of noise, the absence of performance, the failure to fill a room. When the call ended, Derek stood in the corridor for an additional 2 minutes. He was thinking about something specific, the way Wren moved through Vantage's offices. The way he had always interpreted it as efficiency, a person who knew where he was going and went there without ceremony, without announcement, without requiring the acknowledgement of every room he passed through. Derek had considered it a professional quality, one he respected. He was now standing in the corridor with the water station untouched, revising that interpretation. Not efficiency, intention, deliberate, practiced invisibility. As a protective strategy, the understanding of this, the specific shape of why Wren moved the way he did, why he never raised his voice in meetings, why he answered questions directly and concisely and never expanded further than the question required, arrived in Derek's chest as something he had no appropriate category for. Not pity. Something angrier than pity. Something that required a physical outlet, which he didn't have, so he walked back to his office and stood at his window for a while instead. Grant Voss heard me from the executive fitness room. He was on the second mile of a treadmill run he ran at lunch when the meetings ran long, and he needed to metabolize the excess energy that accumulated in him when he spent 4 hours sitting still. The vent above the equipment line opened and my voice came through, and Grant stepped off the treadmill before the first minute was over. He stood in the middle of the fitness room in his running shoes and listened to someone tell the person he'd been trying not to think about for 4 months that the problem was that he wasn't interesting enough. Grant's threshold for restraint was something he'd spent his adult life cultivating. He was the triplet who moved first and thought second, and he had learned through a specific sequence of professional and personal incidents that the impulse to act immediately on what he felt was not always correct, and that the space between impulse and action was where intelligence lived. He stood in the fitness room and practiced that space. It took effort. He thought about the quarterly review in March when Wren had caught a calculation error in a 40-page analyst report during a 3-minute scan and corrected it without comment, without drawing attention to the analyst who'd made the error, without making it into anything except a document that was now accurate. Grant had watched it happen from across the conference table and thought, that was deliberate. He chose not to embarrass anyone. That's not correction. That's protection. He thought about the way Wren had handled the Morrow client situation in January, a client who'd been dismissive and condescending throughout a long meeting, and Wren had managed every interaction with a specific, steady grace that made the condescension look small by comparison. Grant had gone home that evening and thought about it for an hour. He thought about all of this in the fitness room while listening to someone tell Wren he wasn't enough. He changed out of his running shoes with the controlled movements of a person exercising considerable restraint, and he went back to the executive floor. Lionel Voss heard me from his desk. Of the 3 of them, Lionel was the only one who heard the full call from the beginning. He was already sitting near the vent when the first words came through, and he understood immediately what he was listening to, and he made the choice to keep listening with the clarity of someone who has been waiting for an event they've already modeled in their head. Lionel had known something was coming for 4 months. He had known it with the specific certainty of a person who processes information comprehensively and has no mechanism for pretending patterns don't exist. He had watched his brothers watching Wren. He had watched himself watching Wren. He had identified the dynamic with the same analytical precision he applied to everything else and then sat with it carefully, like a man holding a match in a room where he wasn't certain about the ventilation. He listened to the entire call. When it ended, he opened a new document on his computer and typed 2 sentences, then deleted them, then typed a different sentence, then deleted that. He closed the document. He looked at the time, 11:47. Wren would be back at his desk by noon if he followed his standard pattern. 4 minutes had passed since the call ended, which meant Wren was in the stairwell right now, and he was alone. and whatever 4 minutes in a concrete stairwell felt like to a person who had just been told they disappeared, Lionel sat with the knowledge of that and did nothing. Because doing something right now would not be the right thing. Ren didn't need someone appearing in the stairwell. Ren needed to get through the next 4 minutes and come back to his desk and have the dignity of returning to work intact. Sometimes the right thing to do with someone's privacy is to protect it, even when what you want to do is the opposite. Lionel gave Ren his 4 minutes. Then he stood up, got a glass of water, came back to his desk, and waited. I returned to my desk at 11:51. I had the Callaway prep to finish, the afternoon schedule to confirm, 3 emails to answer, and a print run of documents for the 2 o'clock. I settled into my chair, opened my laptop, and began working through it in the systematic order I always used: urgent and time-sensitive first, then chronological, then filing. I was 4 minutes into the Callaway prep when I registered the sound of footsteps that weren't the usual rhythm of the floor. Grant Voss walked into the coordination office at 11:55. I looked up. He was in his afternoon clothes, which meant he'd changed after the gym, which meant he'd come directly here. He was holding nothing, no document, no tablet, no reason to be in the coordination office that I could identify. He stopped about 3 feet from my desk. I waited. "Good meeting this morning?" he said. "The Mercer briefing. Yes, it seemed productive." He nodded. His eyes were doing something I didn't entirely know how to read: a focused, specific quality, like he was checking something without wanting to appear to be checking it. "Let me know if you need anything," he said. "This afternoon." "Of course. Thank you." He didn't leave immediately. He stood there for another few seconds with the air of a man who had come here intending to say something and had said the wrong something and knew it and couldn't correct it without explaining the original intention. Then he nodded once and left. I looked at the empty doorway for a moment, then I went back to the Callaway prep. 7 minutes later, Derek Voss appeared. He was carrying a file. The Callaway file, specifically which I had sent to him at 8 this morning and which he had presumably already read, because Derek read everything within an hour of receiving it as a matter of professional practice. He set it on the corner of my desk. "I've marked some revisions for the 2 o'clock, he said. "Can you incorporate them before the meeting?" I glanced at the file. "Of course. I'll have the updated version to you by 1:30. He stayed. Unlike Grant, who had the quality of someone who had acted on impulse and was now mid-recalibration, Derek had the quality of someone who had made a considered decision to be here and was not going to be made awkward about it. He looked at me with those measured gray eyes, and I felt the specific sensation I had felt many times in 2 years of working for the Voss brothers, the sensation of being observed very carefully by someone who processed observations very efficiently. "Is your schedule manageable this afternoon?" he asked. "It's full but organized. Nothing unmanageable." He nodded. "And this morning?" His voice had a quality I couldn't quite place. Level, but with something deliberate in the level. "Fine," I said. The word landed in my own mouth with a taste I didn't enjoy. "A routine morning." He looked at me for one more moment. Then he took the file back. He'd apparently realized he wanted to revise it further and left. I sat at my desk and stared at the middle distance. 90 seconds later, Lionel appeared in the doorway. He was holding a coffee cup, mine, from the machine on the executive floor that I used approximately twice a week, and that he had apparently retrieved and brought down. He set it on my desk. The order was exactly right. 2 shots, medium roast, small amount of oat milk, the same as always. I looked at it, then at him. "I thought you might want that," he said. "Thank you." He pulled the chair from the adjacent, empty desk, the one that was technically a spare for overflow, and sat in it with the relaxed posture of someone who had decided this was a reasonable place to be. "The Callaway 2 o'clock is going to be long," he said. "Marcus always goes 15 minutes over his allotted time. Have you budgeted for that?" "I have." "Good." He sipped his own coffee. "There's also a scheduling conflict I noticed in next week's Thursday slot. The praxis call overlaps with the board prep by 20 minutes. I've been meaning to flag it." "I already moved the praxis call to the Friday morning window," I said. "I sent the updated calendar to all 3 of you on Monday." He smiled. "So you did." He looked at his coffee cup. "I must have missed it." He had not missed it. Lionel did not miss things. He read every email within 4 hours of receipt, and his response rate was 97% by end of business the same day. He had not missed the calendar update. He was here because he was here, and the calendar update was the reason he'd generated. I looked at the 3 abandoned entry points of the coordination office, the door Grant had come through, the side corridor Derek had used. The main entrance Lionel was now occupying, and I thought about the 40-minute gap between my return from the stairwell and this moment, and I thought about the ventilation system. Oh, I thought. Oh no. I kept my face extremely neutral. How long has that scheduling conflict been on your radar? I asked Lionel. He considered. Since Monday, probably. It's Tuesday. Is it? He looked at the window with an expression of mild reflection, as if he'd lost track of the days. So it is. I drank my coffee, he drank his coffee. The coordination office was quiet, except for the ambient sound of the building and the specific, charged quality of a conversation that was not happening over the top of the one that was. After a while, he stood, returned the borrowed chair to its desk, and said, "The 2:00 documents should be ready by 1, not 1:30. Marcus reviews ahead of time." "I know. I'll have them at 1. He left. I sat at my desk and pressed my palms flat on either side of my keyboard and breathed very carefully. They heard me. All 3 of them. I stared at the middle distance for a count of 10, which was all I could afford, and then I went back to work. That evening, walking to the elevator with my bag on my shoulder and my coat over my arm, I passed the east stairwell. I paused, looked at the door, looked at the small ventilation grate above the door frame. I went home and said to my apartment, to the empty kitchen and the dark windows and the cat that I didn't have but sometimes wished I did, I am in so much trouble. Wednesday arrived with the specific quality of a day that has decided to be consequential regardless of your scheduling preferences. I came in at 7:45, 30 minutes before the floor filled up, because I liked the first half hour, the quiet of it, the way the morning light came through the east windows flat and clean, the particular satisfaction of having the coffee made and the day organized before anyone needed anything. I made coffee, I reviewed the day's schedule, I noted, with the composed acceptance of a person who had spent the night thinking about ventilation systems, that all 3 Voss brothers had added items to their calendars between 8 and 9 that would bring them to the coordination floor. Derek had a document to drop off. Grant had a briefing to collect. Lionel had a meeting that, when I checked the room bookings, was scheduled in a conference room that was not on this floor and had apparently been moved in the last 12 hours to one that was. I sat with this information. Then I made a second cup of coffee because it seemed like a 2-cup kind of morning and went back to my emails. Derek arrived first, at 8:03, which was earlier than I had anticipated. He came around the corner from the executive elevator corridor with the document tucked under his arm, the revised Callaway file, apparently further revised from yesterday, and he stopped in the entrance to the coordination office the way a person stops when they've arrived somewhere and find it less empty than expected. Less empty meaning me, already at my desk, clearly having been here for a while, clearly not surprised to see him. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning." He crossed the room and set the file on my desk. He was wearing the dark navy suit he wore on days when he had external client contact, which meant the afternoon was heavy. His tie was a precise steel blue that I had once heard a junior analyst describe as aggressively competent, a description I had found accurate. He didn't leave after depositing the file. He stood at my desk with his hands in his pockets and the expression he wore when he was deciding something not uncertain, exactly, but deliberate. Like a person reading the last paragraph of a document twice to make sure he has it correctly. "How are you this morning?" he asked. "Fine," I said, and immediately wished I'd chosen a different word. His eyes did something brief and controlled. "Well," he said, "let me know if the revisions need clarification." "I will." He left, or he started to leave. He made it to the corridor entrance and paused there, half-turned, with the air of a man who had said the wrong thing again and was aware of it and was calculating whether correcting it was better or worse than leaving it. He left. Grant arrived at 8:14. He was carrying coffee from the good machine on the executive floor, 2 cups, which he set on my desk with the directness of someone who had decided that the coffee was a sufficient reason for being here and was not going to justify it further. "You take oat milk," he said, which is why I didn't bring it. The machine on 19 doesn't have oat milk, and I didn't want to stop at the kitchen on 16. I looked at the 2 cups. One of them had oat milk in it. There's oat milk in this one, I said. He looked at it. He'd apparently stopped at the kitchen on 16 anyway, and was now committed to having not mentioned it. He sat in the chair beside my desk, the same one Lionel had borrowed yesterday, with the forward lean of someone whose natural posture was designed for action and found sitting somewhat theoretical. Do you have the Praxis account background documents? He asked. For the rescheduled Friday call? I pulled them up and sent them to his tablet. He glanced at the notification, confirmed receipt, and then set his tablet face down on the desk, with the air of a man who had just used up his official excuse. We sat with the coffee. Is there anything else for the Friday call? He asked after a moment. I'll send the full briefing pack by Thursday afternoon. Good. The morning light had fully arrived by this point, coming through the east windows at the angle I liked, turning the coordination office into something almost warm. Grant was looking at the window with the expression of a person thinking about something else. When he'd been sitting there for approximately 7 minutes, Lionel appeared. He came through the main entrance with his laptop under his arm, scanned the room, Grant at the chair beside my desk, me at my desk, the 2 coffee cups, and said, without any particular inflection, I see the early meeting has already started. Grant looked at him. There's no meeting. Lionel sat in the second spare chair, which required retrieving it from the adjacent desk. He did this with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had no intention of pretending he wasn't going to sit down. Good morning, Ren. Good morning. He opened his laptop. The conference room booking I moved down here had a conflict, he said. I've rebooked it on 22, so I'll be working here for the next hour. There are 3 open conference rooms on this floor, I said. Yes, he agreed pleasantly. But this one has better light. Grant made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Derek reappeared in the corridor entrance at 8:22 with a different document, a contract amendment that required my signature as authorized coordinator, which was entirely legitimate and which he had presumably just remembered needed processing. He surveyed the room, Lionel at the spare chair with his laptop, Grant at the other spare chair with his coffee, me at my desk. He came in and placed the contract amendment in front of me. While you have a moment, he said. I signed the amendment. I slid it back. He picked it up. He looked at his brothers with the expression he used in board meetings when he was deciding whether to let something continue or redirect it, not disapproval, exactly, but the specific assessment of a person who needed to know what was happening before he could evaluate it. He sat on the edge of the secondary desk, the one nobody used, and crossed his arms and looked at his coffee cup, which he had apparently set down at the corner of my desk when he arrived and which I had not registered. The coordination office held 4 people for a period that I would estimate at 23 minutes. During those 23 minutes, Lionel worked. Grant drank his coffee and appeared to be reviewing something on his phone, but mostly wasn't. Derek sat on the edge of the desk and occasionally asked me questions about the schedule that were legitimate but could have been sent via message. I answered all questions, processed all documents, and kept my expression at the specific setting I had developed over 2 years of working with 3 of the most observant men I'd ever encountered, the setting that communicated professional engagement while revealing nothing about what was happening behind it. I was behind it, doing several things simultaneously. I was finishing the morning's email triage. I was tracking the fact that all 3 of my bosses were sitting in my office at 8 in the morning with the thin, professional excuses of people who had come here because they wanted to be here. And I was not examining because examining it would mean acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would mean deciding what to do with it. And deciding what to do with it was not something I was ready to do on a Wednesday morning with a full day's work ahead of me. The specific warmth of having 3 people who had heard the worst 47 seconds of my recent week and responded by showing up. At 8:42, other staff began arriving on the floor, and the coordination office lost its particular quiet. Grant stood, collected his coffee, and said he had a 9 o'clock. Lionel saved his document, closed his laptop, and said he'd send the Friday briefing notes by noon. Derek uncrossed his arms, picked up his contract amendment, and said the morning briefing was at 9:15. They left at 3-minute intervals. I sat at my desk and looked at the 2 coffee cups, one with oat milk, from the machine on the executive floor via the kitchen on 16, and the revised Callaway file and the signed contract amendment, and I thought, these are the evidence of something. I'm not certain what, but something. My colleague Bex, who sat 3 desks over and had been watching the morning's events with the focused appreciation of someone who understood that what she was witnessing was remarkable, materialized at my elbow at 8:51. "I have questions," she said. "I don't have answers. They were all in here for 20 minutes. They had legitimate reasons." She looked at the 2 coffee cups. "Both of those are for you, aren't they?" I picked up the one with oat milk. "Yes." She made a sound of profound satisfaction, collected her tablet, and went to her 9 o'clock. I finished my morning prep. I delivered the Callaway documents at exactly 1 o'clock, as promised. The 2 o'clock ran 17 minutes over, because Marcus always ran 17 minutes over, and I had budgeted for this. And when the meeting ended at 3:17 and the clients were being walked to the elevator by Grant, Derek stopped beside my chair on his way out and said, quietly, "Good work this afternoon." He said this sometimes. He wasn't a person who withheld acknowledgement. He just delivered it precisely and without embellishment. But today, it landed differently. Today, it had the quality of something with a second meaning underneath it, the way a sentence in a document can be technically about the subject it's addressing and also about something else entirely. "Thank you," I said. He nodded and left. I looked at the empty conference room for a moment. Then I packed up my things and went home and thought about ventilation systems. Thursday. I noticed the calendar restructuring on Thursday morning. I was reviewing next week's schedule, standard Thursday morning task, getting ahead of the week before it arrived when I realized that my Tuesday and Wednesday blocks looked different. The all-staff quarterly preview, which I typically attended as coordinator, had been removed from my calendar and replaced with a working group session. The Mercer progress briefing, a large cross-departmental meeting that I usually spent 40 minutes of setup preparing for, had been restructured so that my involvement was pre-meeting only, with a designated alternate covering the live session. Both changes were logged in the scheduling system under Derek's authorization. Timestamp, Tuesday evening, 11:43 p.m. I sat with this for a while. The all-staff quarterly preview was a 2-hour session with approximately 40 attendees, the majority of whom were alphas from senior departments. It was professionally routine and personally exhausting in a way I never discussed with anyone. The sustained effort of maintaining my suppressants under the ambient pressure of that many dominant pheromones, of being small and precise in a room that rewarded volume and assertion. Derek had removed it from my calendar at 11:43 on Tuesday night. I thought about this. I thought about what it meant that he had done it, and what it meant that he had done it quietly. No conversation, no flagging. Just a structural change to my week that made something easier without requiring me to admit it was hard. I pulled up my messages and typed, "I noticed the schedule changes for next week. Before I can approve the alternate coverage for the Mercer briefing, I'll need to brief them on the account background. Can I have 30 minutes with whoever's covering?" His reply came in 4 minutes. "Already arranged. 30-minute briefing block Thursday at 4. The alternate is James from the Callaway team. He has the relevant background, but will need your protocol notes." "I'll have them ready by 3:30, I wrote. "Thank you," he wrote back. Then, after a pause, "Let me know if the working group format doesn't suit you. The arrangement is flexible." "It suits me," I wrote. "Thank you for arranging it." I stared at my screen for a moment, then I closed the message thread and went back to work. Grant's version of the week was less structural and more gravitational. He simply appeared. Not intrusively, he didn't hover, didn't make it obvious, didn't do anything that required a response from me. He was just present in the adjacent spaces. Near the elevator bank when I arrived Thursday morning, in the kitchen corridor when I went for water at 2:30, in the lobby at 5:45, apparently waiting for a car, when I left through the front entrance. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was coincidence. The second time I noted it with the professional attentiveness I applied to patterns in data. The third time I acknowledged it internally and decided not to acknowledge it externally, because acknowledging it would require having a conversation I wasn't ready for. On Thursday afternoon, he held the elevator. I was coming down from the records floor, arms full of files from the physical archive. He was in the elevator when the doors opened on my floor, apparently heading up from the lobby. He saw me, assessed the pile of files, and held the door without being asked. I got in. The doors closed. "7th floor?" he asked. "9th, I said. He pressed 9. The elevator moved. He was standing at a distance that was professionally appropriate, and somehow still felt like the specific distance of someone who had decided they were available. "Those look heavy," he said. "They're not, actually. Old files, mostly paper and air." He looked at the top folder. Mercer Account Archive? 1998 through 2003. Background for James before he takes over the briefing coverage. Grant looked at this. He had the expression he wore when he was deciding whether to say something, a brief internal review, like he was checking the thing against some standard before releasing it. "You didn't have to pull those personally," he said. "Records can send them up." "Records takes 3 days for archive requests. I needed them today." He nodded. A pause. Then, "If you need anything else for the handoff, the briefing prep, or whatever, let me know." "I'll be fine," I said. The elevator opened on 9. "Thank you." He held the door while I stepped out with the files. I didn't look back, but I was aware of him standing there until the doors closed. I went to my desk and set down the files and sat for a moment with my hands on the desk surface and took a breath. I was fine. I was handling it. All of it, the week, the breakup, the specific and growing awareness that something was happening in this building that I was going to have to address eventually, just not yet, not right now, not while I was still assembling myself back into a shape that could handle it. The suppressant patch I'd applied that morning was the stronger formula, the kind I kept for high-stress periods. I'd used it 3 days in a row now, which was more than I usually needed. I noted this without examining it and went back to work. Lionel's version of the week was the one that required the most defenses. Because Lionel communicated with precision, and precision was harder to deflect than presence. The documentary message had arrived Tuesday evening, the specific film I'd mentioned once in passing to a colleague, available on the platform I used, worth watching. I had watched it. It was excellent. I had not sent a reply because sending a reply would have required acknowledging that he had registered that detail and stored it and retrieved it 6 weeks later, and I had not been ready to acknowledge that. Thursday morning, a message arrived at 7:52, before I was officially at my desk. The Thursday standing check-in has been moved to video this week because of the schedule changes on 19. The new link is in the calendar. Let me know if the time doesn't work. The standing check-in had not been moved to video. There was no new calendar link. This was a fabrication with the specific purpose of generating a response from me. I knew this because I was the person who maintained the calendar. I sent back, "The Thursday check-in is still in person. I can see the booking. I'll see you at 3. A pause of approximately 90 seconds. Then, "You're right. My mistake." I looked at this message. Then, for what it's worth, the documentary was worth watching. The section on structural acoustics in mid-century buildings was particularly interesting. I stared at my screen for a full 20 seconds. The documentary was about urban architecture. It had a section approximately 14 minutes on how mid-century commercial buildings handled sound transmission, with specific reference to the way ventilation systems in buildings constructed between 1965 and 1985 were designed without acoustic insulation, creating pathways for sound to travel vertically through shared shafts. He had watched the documentary. He had watched the specific documentary he'd recommended to me and had watched the section about acoustic transmission in mid-century buildings and had mentioned it in a message. This was Lionel's version of a confession. I sat at my desk for a moment with my hands very still. Then I wrote back, "I watched it. The section on acoustic transmission was interesting. I learned something I should have understood 2 years ago." A longer pause. Then, "To be fair, the building predates the current safety codes. It's a structural quirk, not a design flaw." "Thank you," I wrote. "That's a gracious way to put it." "It's accurate," he wrote back. I looked at the messages. Then my inbox pinged with the Thursday prep documents and I turned back to work, because the alternative was sitting here and thinking about all of this in a way that would make it impossible to function, and I had a full day ahead. The scent incident happened at 2:15 on Thursday afternoon. We were in the small conference room on the 19th floor, a working session on the Aldermere account, the 4 of us plus 2 analysts who were presenting their findings. The room held 8 people comfortably. The ventilation in this room worked correctly, unlike the stairwell, and the air was neutral and managed. I was taking notes. The presentation was straightforward. I was half listening and half organizing the summary document in real time, which was the standard mode for these sessions. The suppressant patch, I realized at approximately 2:13, was losing efficacy. This happens sometimes. High-stress periods metabolize the compound faster, and 3 consecutive days of high-strength formula had apparently crossed a threshold where the patch needed replacing, and I had not replaced it at noon as I should have because I'd been managing the archive files in the James briefing prep and I'd forgotten. I was aware of it in the specific internal way you're aware of your own biology before anyone else is a warmth that moved up from my sternum to my throat, a shift in the quality of the air around me that I could feel before anyone could detect it. I reached under the conference table and pressed my fingers against the patch at my wrist, which was standard protocol pressure activated the secondary compound in the patch coating, which would buy approximately 15 minutes. I had the secondary compound activated and was in the middle of a note about the Aldermere revenue projections when I became aware that the room had changed. Not loudly, not obviously. But the 2 analysts presenting had reached a natural pause and were looking at their slides, and in that pause, in the stillness of the room, I became aware that all 3 Voss brothers had gone slightly, collectively, and very carefully, still. The specific stillness of people who had received information through a channel other than the conventional ones and were managing their response to it. I looked at the slide on the screen, I wrote down the revenue figure, I pressed my pen against my notepad 3 times, which was the habit I had when I was gathering myself. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to check something. 2 minutes." I left the conference room. In the corridor, I replaced the patch at my wrist with the spare I kept in my jacket pocket. I took 4 slow breaths. I counted to 20. Then I straightened my jacket, checked my reflection in the dark glass of the corridor window, and went back into the conference room. The analysts were continuing the presentation. None of the 3 brothers looked at me when I came back in, which was exactly the right response, not the conspicuous, studied neutrality of people pretending not to notice, but the genuine professional redirection of people who had decided that acknowledging what had just happened in front of 2 junior analysts was not something any of them were going to do. I sat down, picked up my pen, and continued taking notes. After the meeting, when the analysts had collected their materials and left, I found myself briefly alone in the conference room with Derek while the other 2 stopped in the corridor to handle something on their phones. I put my notebook in my bag. "I'm aware that the patch failed," I said, not looking at him. "I've replaced it. It won't happen again this week." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not asking you to explain your medical management to me," he said. "I know, I'm being practical." Another pause. Then, carefully, "The room is small, and the session ran long. It's not unusual for management to become more difficult in extended meetings." He wasn't wrong. He was also being, in his precise and architecture-oriented way, gentle. I looked at him. He looked back. "I'll adjust the schedule," he said. "Shorter sessions when possible." "That's not necessary." "It's not unnecessary either." He picked up the folder he'd brought to the meeting. "We'll discuss it later." We went to the 3 o'clock. That evening, walking to the elevator for the last time, I thought about the week. About the calendar restructuring, and the elevator, and the documentary, and the coffee with oat milk from a machine that didn't have oat milk. About the specific ways that 3 very different people were saying something they hadn't said in words yet. The elevator arrived. I got in. I pressed the lobby button and watched the doors close and thought, tomorrow is Friday, and Friday will require a decision about something I have been not deciding since Tuesday. The elevator descended. I was ready. Friday arrived gray and deliberate, the kind of morning that felt like a held breath. I came in at the usual time, made coffee, reviewed the schedule. The day was lighter than most, 1 external meeting in the morning, cleared calendar after 2, and no standing late sessions. By 4 o'clock, the floor had begun its Friday exodus. Junior staff leaving early, the analysts packing up their laptops. The steady thinning of presence that happened every Friday when the week finally decided it was done with people. I stayed. This was not unusual. I stayed late on Fridays semi-regularly, using the quiet hours between 4 and 6 to process the week's accumulated documentation, organize the following week's structure, and do the kind of careful administrative work that required uninterrupted concentration. The floor being empty was a resource I used. What was different today was that I was aware with the clarity I'd been building toward all week that I was going to have to say something. Not because I had fully decided what, exactly, but because the alternative was carrying this indefinitely, and carrying it indefinitely was already costing me in ways I could measure. The suppressants running through faster than they should, the 4-minute timers I was giving myself in the morning, the specific effort of maintaining a professional surface while underneath it something was reconfiguring. I was tired of the weight of not saying. At 4:15, the floor was quiet enough that I could hear the elevator chime from my desk. I did not look up from my screen. I heard footsteps, then the particular sound of Derek's office door, which had a distinctive quality heavier than the others. It closed with a finality that other doors didn't. Then, 7 minutes later, the sound of the strategy room, which was Grant's preferred late-day space. Then, quieter, the particular rhythm of Lionel's walk, even-paced, unhurried. I listened to all three of them arrive on the floor independently, across a 20-minute window, and I thought about whether this was coincidence. It was not coincidence. I saved my document, I straightened the folders on my desk, I put my pen in the cup on the right side of the desk, where I kept it when I was finishing for the day rather than pausing. Then I picked up the document I'd actually come here to deliver, the weekly coordination summary, which I'd been holding since 3 o'clock, and I walked to Derek's office. The door was open. I knocked on the frame anyway. Derek was at his desk, working. He looked up. Behind him, through the glass partition that separated his office from the adjacent strategy space, I could see Grant standing at the side table with a contract, and Lionel at the far end with his laptop. All three of them in the same space at 5:20 on a Friday evening, which was either an extraordinary coincidence or the natural result of three people who had spent the week circling the same thing finally converging on it. The latter, definitely the latter. I came in and closed the door behind me. All three of them went still. I set the coordination summary on Derek's desk. He didn't pick it up. Grant had turned from the side table. Lionel had set his laptop screen down, not closed, just angled away, the gesture of someone giving attention without ceremony. I stood in the middle of the room. "You heard me in the stairwell," I said. Not a question. A statement of fact that I had been carrying since Tuesday afternoon and was now setting down in the room where it belonged. The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens when a room of very intelligent people have been waiting for a conversation to start and are now deciding how to begin it. Lionel spoke first. He did this the way he did most things, without preamble, without the performance of hesitation, because he had already done his hesitating internally and arrived at his words, prepared. "Yes," he said, "all three of us. The ventilation shaft on the east stairwell runs directly to the 22nd floor. I heard from my desk. I don't know where the others were." "Corridor outside the strategy room," Derek said. "Fitness room," Grant said. I nodded. I'd assumed as much. "I should have told you sooner that the acoustic transfer existed," Lionel continued. "I knew about it. I should have flagged it when you started using the stairwell for calls." "Why didn't you?" A brief pause. "Because you seemed to value the privacy of it, and I thought the likelihood of anyone overhearing anything sensitive was low." He met my eyes steadily. "I was wrong to make that calculation for you." This was the closest thing to an apology that Lionel was capable of producing without the word sorry, which I had learned over 2 years he used almost never, not because he was careless, but because he considered the word imprecise when what was actually meant was, "I made a decision that affected you without your knowledge, and the decision was incorrect, and I am telling you so." I accepted it as the apology it was. "I appreciate that," I said. "And I'm not angry about it. I'm telling you because pretending I don't know was costing more than it was worth." Grant set the contract down on the side table and came to stand at the edge of the conversation space, not close, but fully present, no longer managing the distance. "The things he said to you," Grant said. His voice was even and had the quality of something that had been held at that evenness with effort all week. "They weren't true." "I know that," I said. He looked at me. "Do you?" Because from where I was standing, watching you come back to your desk that afternoon and work through the rest of the day like nothing had happened, I wasn't sure you believed it. "I believe it now," I said. "It took a few days, but I believe it." Something in Grant's expression loosened slightly. The jaw that had been tight all week, the particular set of his shoulders that I had learned over 2 years, indicated something being managed. It eased. Not fully, but slightly. Derek had not spoken since, confirming where he'd been. He was sitting at his desk, with his hands flat on the surface in the way he sat when he was receiving information he intended to process carefully before responding to it. He was looking at me with the gray eyes that saw everything efficiently, and there was something in his expression I had seen before in the conference room on Tuesday, in the corridor on Wednesday, but which I now had context for. He had said, on Tuesday afternoon, that he had something he'd been trying to find the right way to say for 4 months. He had not said it. He had said it existed. "Derek," I said. He looked at me. "You said there was something you'd been trying to find the right way to say." A pause. "Yes. I'm not asking you to say it tonight. I wanted to acknowledge that I heard it, that I've been thinking about it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What have you been thinking?" "I've been thinking," I said carefully, "that I've been aware of something for a while. In this building, in this office, in the way the three of you move around certain spaces. And I've been not acknowledging it because acknowledging it meant deciding something, and I wasn't ready to decide." All three of them were very still. "And now?" Lionel said. His voice was quiet. "Now I think I was using not ready as a way of not deciding, and those aren't the same thing." I looked at each of them in turn, Lionel at the far end, quiet and watchful. Grant close by, holding himself back from whatever his instinct was saying. Derek behind his desk, hands flat, controlled, and open at once. I said, "I need to think through what I want. Not what's reasonable or practical or professionally appropriate, though those matter too, but what I actually want, for myself. And I can't do that in the office at 5:30 on a Friday." "No," Derek said, "you can't. So I'm going home," I said, "and I'm going to think about it over the weekend. And on Monday, I'll say what I've decided." Another silence. Then Grant said, "Okay." That was all. Okay. No pressure, no attempt to accelerate the timeline, no declaration that was designed to influence the outcome before I'd reached it. Just, okay. I picked up my bag. I looked at the three of them one more time. "Thank you," I said, "for this week. For all of it, the coffee and the schedule and the documentary, and not making it obvious until I was ready for it to be obvious." Something moved through all three of their expressions in quick succession: surprise, and then something warmer than surprise. Lionel nodded once. Grant said, quietly, "Take your time." Derek said, "Monday." I left. In the elevator, going down, I pressed my back against the wall and looked at the ceiling and breathed. I was terrified. I was also underneath the terrified, and around it, and threaded through it, something that I recognized but had not allowed myself to name yet. The elevator reached the lobby. I walked home through the Friday evening city, and for the first time all week, I felt the weight of not saying fully lift. Saturday arrived slowly. I lay in bed for a while after waking up, looking at the ceiling and taking inventory of my own interior state with the same methodical attention I gave to everything else. This was my standard approach to large questions. Assess what was actually present, rather than what I thought should be present or what would be convenient to feel. What was present? A residual ache from Tuesday that was fading, not because I was suppressing it, but because it was genuinely diminishing. Nate's words had lost some of their sharpness. What remained was less about the loss of the specific relationship and more about what it had exposed: the specific vulnerability of believing someone's assessment of you before you'd assessed yourself. That was fading too. What was also present, underneath the fading, the warmer thing I'd noticed in the elevator. I looked at it directly now, in the undemanding quiet of Saturday morning, and identified it with the precision it deserved. I wanted this. I had wanted it for longer than Tuesday. I had wanted it with the carefully managed distance of a person who had good reasons to maintain professional boundaries and had used those reasons so effectively that he'd almost convinced himself they were the whole story. But they weren't. The reasons were real. The distance was also real. And underneath the distance, also real, was the specific and undeniable fact of what it felt like to have three people hear the worst 47 seconds of your week and respond by rearranging their entire gravitational field around you. I got up and made coffee. I called my friend Petra at 9:15. Petra had known me for 6 years, which meant she had known me through the period when I discovered I was an Omega and spent 8 months being very rational about it. And through the period when I started taking suppressants and was very rational about that, and through approximately 4 years of watching me be very rational about things that would have benefited from slightly less rationality, she answered on the second ring. "You're calling before 10 on a Saturday," she said. "That means something actually happened." "Something happened," I confirmed. I told her. All of it, the stairwell, Tuesday, the week, Friday evening. I told her about the coffee with oat milk and the calendar restructuring and the documentary with the 14-minute section on acoustic transmission in mid-century buildings. I told her about the conference room and the patch and all three of them going still. I told her about standing in Derek's office at 5:30 and saying it out loud. She was quiet for most of it, in the way Petra was quiet when she was listening with full attention rather than preparing her response. When I finished, she said, "I've been waiting for you to tell me something like this for 8 months. I didn't know about it 8 months ago." "No," she said patiently, "but you've been different since you started at Vantage. A particular kind of different that I kept expecting you to explain, and you never did." She paused. "The kind of different where you're more careful than usual. Like you're managing something you're not telling me about." I thought about this. She wasn't wrong. "I was managing it," I said. "What are you afraid of?" I considered this seriously because it was a serious question, and Petra was a serious person who would detect a deflection. "The power differential," I said. "They're my employers. That's real and it matters. I was hired for my competence, and I need that to remain the basis of my professional identity here. If this, whatever this is, goes wrong, or becomes something that changes how I'm perceived in this building, I lose something I've built over 2 years." Petra let this sit for a moment. "Those are legitimate concerns," she said. "I know. They're also," she continued, "the kind of concerns that a person who has already decided what they want uses to slow themselves down, so the wanting feels more considered." I was quiet. "Am I wrong?" she asked. "No," I said. "So what do you actually want?" I stood in my kitchen with my coffee cup warm in both hands and looked out the window at the Saturday city, the slow traffic, the people on the pavement, the particular quality of a morning that had nowhere it needed to be. "I want to stop managing it," I said. "I want to stop taking the stronger suppressants because I'm afraid of what happens if they notice something. I want to go into a meeting and not spend energy on being invisible." She waited. "I want to find out if what I think this is what it actually is." "Yes," Petra said. "That's what you want. It's complicated. Most real things are." She paused. "Ren, you've been fine for 2 years. You've been responsible and professional, and you've managed everything beautifully, and it's cost you something. Not catastrophically, not in ways you can't afford, but something." She said it gently. "You're allowed to want something that isn't fine." I let that settle. After we hung up, I stayed in the kitchen for a while. I was thinking about the week, about each specific gesture, separately and in sequence. The revised Callaway file, the coffee, the calendar, Grant's hand on the elevator door, Lionel's message with the 14-minute section. All of it adding up to something that was not a coincidence and was not professional obligation and was not, I now understood fully, something I wanted to walk away from. I had my answer. I had, if I was being honest, had it for longer than Saturday. Sunday arrived with the quality of a day that has already been decided. I was reading in the afternoon when the first delivery arrived. It was from a ramen restaurant I had mentioned once in a Thursday morning briefing 3 weeks ago, when the conversation had briefly drifted to lunch plans and I had said something about missing the ramen place near my old apartment. The order was the exact dish I would have chosen, the tonkotsu, with the soft egg, extra chashu. I knew before I checked the order details that it was from Derek because it was precisely the right thing and had been arranged with zero fanfare. The note said simply, "For Sunday," no obligation to reply. I sat with the ramen and thought about the man who had restructured my work calendar at 11:43 at night and had sent exactly the right food on Sunday afternoon with the explicit instruction that I owed him nothing for. 20 minutes later, a second delivery. An amount of bread that was excessive by any reasonable standard sourdough, a seeded loaf, Something with olives that smelled extraordinary from a bakery I had walked past once with Grant 8 months ago when we'd been returning from an external client meeting, and I'd said, without really meaning to say it out loud, that place smells incredible. We hadn't gone in. I hadn't mentioned it again. Grant had apparently remembered the name of the bakery. There was no note. This was also correct, because Grant was not a note person. The bread was the note. I sat with the bread for a while. The third delivery arrived as the light was going amber and long through the windows. One item, a single pastry in a white box with a small card tucked under the string. The pastry was from a bakery in the coastal city where I'd grown up, a specific place, a specific thing. A honey and almond cream pastry that I had mentioned in exactly one conversation, in passing, 6 weeks ago, in a meeting that ran late and temporarily became a conversation about where people were from. I had mentioned my hometown. I had mentioned, briefly, a bakery. I had not mentioned it again. The card said, I found the bakery's online ordering last week. The shipping was complicated. I hope it arrived intact. Lionel had spent time finding a bakery's online ordering system, navigating complicated shipping, and sent me one pastry with a card that made no declaration and asked for nothing. I sat on my kitchen floor with the ramen and the bread and the honey almond pastry, and I laughed. It started as a real laugh, the specific helpless kind that happens when something is so exactly right that your body doesn't have a more appropriate response, and then it became something else, briefly. The kind of crying that isn't sad, but is the release of something that has been held for too long, and then it went back to laughing again. I called Petra. She answered immediately. You're calling again. Same day. That's new. They sent food, I said. All three of them? All three. Ramen and bread and a pastry from my hometown that required complicated shipping. She was quiet for a moment. Ren, she said. I know. You already know what you want. I know. Then stop waiting for Monday, she said. You've already decided. Monday is just when you say it out loud. I looked at the three items on my kitchen floor, the specific care of three separate people expressed in three completely different ways, and I thought, she's right. I've known since Friday evening. Possibly longer. I'll see you on the other side of Monday, I told her. She laughed. Go eat your pastry. I ate the pastry. It tasted like home, like a specific place and a specific time and the person I was before I came to a city and learned to be invisible. It tasted like the thing I was deciding to stop being. I went to bed early. I slept well for the first time since Tuesday. I arrived at 7:30. The floor was empty, except for the cleaning staff finishing the overnight cycle, and I made coffee and sat at my desk in the early quiet. I reviewed the week ahead, 2 major client meetings, the Aldermere account reaching a decision point, the Standing Fridays briefing, a full and manageable week. I had my coordination summary ready. My desk was organized. My patch was the standard formula, the everyday one, the one I'd been using before Tuesday, because I had made a decision about the stronger formula, and that decision was, not anymore. At 8:15, the executive elevator chimed. I did not look up. Footsteps. The particular rhythm I'd spent 2 years learning Derek's measured pace, Grant's heavier step, Lionel's even unhurried tread. All three of them together, which meant they'd ridden the elevator together, which meant they'd arrived at the same time, which meant they'd probably been together before arriving. They came around the corner and stopped in the entrance to the coordination office. I looked up. All three of them looked at me with the expression of people who had spent the weekend in the specific state of waiting and were now at the end of it. Good morning, I said. Good morning, Derek said. Grant said nothing. He was looking at me with the forward-leaning quality that was his version of complete attention. Lionel said, The bread arrived intact, I hope. It was excessive, I said. There was enough for 3 days. The corner of his mouth moved. That was intentional. I stood up. I closed my laptop. I said, Can we use the small conference room? It wasn't a question. The small conference room on 19 was, on Monday morning at 8:15, empty and quiet. I closed the door. The 4 of us arranged ourselves around one end of the table, not the formal arrangement of a meeting, but the informal proximity of people who were there for something else. I stood at the head of the table, not because I needed the positioning, but because what I was going to say required me to feel steady, and standing was steadier than sitting right now. I said, I've thought about it. I looked at all three of them. I've thought about the power differential, I said. It's real and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. I know what this building looks like from the outside and I know what people will say, and I know that my professional reputation is something I've earned and intend to keep. I looked at Derek. Those things aren't reasons not to. They're things that need to be handled carefully. I expect us to handle them carefully. He nodded once. We will. I looked at Grant. I need you to know that I don't want to be protected, I said. I searched for the right word, adjacent to someone who's present. That's different. I can handle my own challenges. I need you to believe that. Grant's jaw was tight, but his eyes were open. I know you can, he said. I'll work on the distinction. I looked at Lionel. I need you to keep telling me things, I said. The way you do the documentary, the schedule conflict, that wasn't a conflict. I need to know what you notice. Lionel looked at me with the expression he'd been using all week, the one I now understood correctly, the open, warm, specific attention of a person who had been paying attention for a long time and had been waiting for permission to show it. I've been keeping a list, he said, of things you might want to know. Of course you have, I said, and I heard the warmth in my own voice and didn't manage it. Then I looked at all three of them together. I said, I want this. I'm not certain what this looks like yet in all its specifics, and I think we need time to figure that out carefully. But I know what I want, and what I want is to stop pretending I don't want it. A silence. Then Derek stood up from his chair. He came to stand in front of me, not close, not imposing, just present, in the way he was present when something mattered to him and he was allowing himself to show it. He was still contained, still precise, still entirely himself. But underneath it, the thing I'd been seeing fragments of all week was fully visible. The something he'd been trying to find the right way to say for 4 months. He didn't say it in words. He reached out, slowly, and touched my jaw with 2 fingers, the briefest contact, the specific gesture of someone who has been very careful and is being careful still, but is no longer maintaining a distance he doesn't mean. I've wanted to say it for months, he said, very quietly. I just needed to be certain you were choosing it and not accepting it. There's a difference. I know the difference, I said. His hand dropped. He stepped back, but the quality of the room had changed. Grant moved. He was always the one who moved, impulse, managed into intention, momentum in his bones. He came and stood close, and I looked up at him, and he looked down at me with the expression I'd been learning the meaning of all week. The specific look of a person who has been exercising restraint for longer than restraint is comfortable and has been given permission to release it. He put his hand over mine on the table. His hand was large and warm and entirely certain. I turned my hand over. His fingers closed around mine. He exhaled the same exhale he'd done in the elevator on Thursday, barely audible, very real. Like the release of something that had been held. Lionel came last. He came to stand at my other side and he said my name once, quietly, the way he had in the message, the way a name sounds when it has been in someone's head long enough to become familiar. I looked at him. He said, I have 17 things on the list. I laughed. The real kind, the helpless kind. 17. 17, he confirmed. I'll tell you all of them, but not today. You have a 9 o'clock. I do, I said. He reached out and straightened the collar of my jacket, not the gesture of claiming, but the gesture of someone who was taking care of something that now had permission to be taken care of. The touch lasted 2 seconds. It was the most Lionel thing anyone had ever done. I looked at the 3 of them, Derek with his careful hands and his architecture of protection, Grant with his warm, certain grip on my fingers, Lionel with his 17 things and his precise and extraordinary attention. I said, I have terms. Grant made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Good, he said. Of course you do, Derek said. Name them. No changes to my professional structure without my input first, I said. I handle my own career. I'm not a project. I'm the person in this arrangement who has the most to lose professionally, and I need to know that my judgment about my own situation is respected. Agreed, all 3 of them said, nearly simultaneously, the way they sometimes did. I looked at Derek specifically. The stronger suppressants are finished, I said. I'm going back to the standard formula. If that creates complications in the office, we address the complications directly. I'm not hiding my designation on top of everything else. Derek's expression did something I didn't have full language for yet. Something opened in it. You shouldn't have been, he said. I know. I was being practical. Now I'm being a different kind of practical. He nodded. I looked at all three of them. And I need this to be slow, I said. Whatever this is, the figuring out of what it is, I need it to happen at a pace where I'm choosing every step. Not because I'm uncertain, because I've spent 2 years being certain and quiet and careful, and I'd like the thing I actually want to be something I arrived at deliberately. Lionel said, we have time. Grant said, as much as you need. Derek said, Monday to Monday, if that's what it takes. I looked at our hands, Grant's over mine, warm and certain. I thought about the ramen and the bread and the honey almond pastry. I thought about 11:43 at night and a calendar restructured with no announcement. I thought about a documentary with a 14-minute section and a list of 17 things. Okay, I said. Grant's hand tightened slightly on mine. Derek reached out and set 2 fingers briefly against the back of my other hand, the same gesture as before, brief and certain. Lionel said, very quietly, Good morning, Ren. Good morning, I said. We had a 9 o'clock. We had a full week ahead. The floor was filling up now, the sound of the working day arriving through the conference room door. I straightened my jacket. Grant released my hand. We all took a breath. Then Derek opened the conference room door, and the Monday morning sound came in, and we went back to work. 3 months later, the HR documentation took 2 weeks to complete. Vantage Group had a disclosure protocol for internal relationships, which we followed to the letter. Derek had insisted on it, and I had agreed. Because the letter of the protocol was the right thing, and I was not going to compromise my professional standing for the appearance of romance, and neither were they. My title changed. Not diminished, restructured. I moved from executive coordinator to senior operations director, a change that Derek had apparently been preparing the documentation for since January, before any of this. Because I had outgrown the coordinator role 6 months ago, and he knew it, and had been building the transition quietly, and which now happened on a timeline that looked, from the outside, like it might be connected to our relationship, and which I was prepared to demonstrate was not, because the work was there, and the record was clean, and I had been doing the job for months before either of us said a word. Anyone who suggested otherwise was referred to the 4-year performance documentation that Lionel had been maintaining also apparently since before any of this. Also apparently because he found the documentation intrinsically satisfying and not because he was building a case, though the effect was the same. Bex stopped by my desk one Tuesday morning 3 months in and looked at the new title on my door placard and said, For what it's worth, I always thought coordinator was underselling you. I appreciate that. She looked at me with the expression of someone who had watched the entire sequence of events and had formed a comprehensive opinion and was deciding whether to share it. She shared it. They're different with you here, you know. Not softer, exactly. More present, like they're actually in the building instead of just occupying it. I thought about this. I think that's what happens, I said, when people stop managing the distance. She nodded. Then she went back to her desk, and I went back to mine, and the morning continued. On a Thursday evening 3 months in, I was at my desk finishing the week's closing documentation when a message appeared on my screen. From Lionel, I'm at 17. I've started the second list. I looked at the message. What's on the second list? I wrote back. Things you don't know I've noticed yet. Such as, the way you count to 3 before saying something difficult, he wrote. The fact that you always leave the office by the south exit on Wednesdays, even though the north exit is closer to your building, because the south exit passes the good bookshop and you check the window display even when you're not going in. The specific order you make coffee, warm the cup first, then the shot, then the milk, which is more steps than necessary, and which you've done the same way every single morning for 2 years. I read this twice. How long is the second list? I asked. He sent a number. I laughed. Out loud, at my desk, in the empty office. The door to the strategy room opened, and Lionel appeared in the corridor, saw me laughing, and looked satisfied in the particular way of someone who had calculated the exact right amount of information to share. Go home, he said. It's Thursday. I'm finishing the documentation. It'll be there tomorrow. I looked at him. He looked back with the warm, unhurried attention that I had spent 3 months learning was not going to diminish. It was not a quantity that reduced with exposure. If anything, it was the opposite. The more time passed, the more I understood the depth of what had been there all along, patient and quiet and entirely certain. I saved my document. I put on my coat. Derek was in the lobby when I came down, waiting for the car. He'd had a late client dinner, was just returning. He saw me, and the expression that crossed his face was the one I had started to look for, the one that was only for me, the one that had been there all along, underneath the precision and the architecture of everything else. "Good evening," I said. "Good evening." He fell into step beside me. "The car is 5 minutes." "I have my own car." "I know." He didn't slow down, humor me. I humored him. We stood outside in the mild evening air, and I thought about a Tuesday in November when I had stood in a stairwell with a 4-minute timer and told myself that whatever I was feeling, I was fine. I thought about all the ways fine had been insufficient, all the space between fine and what was actually present, all the careful managing I had done with that space. I didn't want to manage it anymore. I wasn't going to. Grant's car pulled up. He had apparently been in the building too, working late, and his driver had collected him from the side entrance. He got out when he saw us, leaning against the car door with his arms crossed and the look of someone who was entirely unsurprised to find his brothers here. "Are we going to dinner?" he asked. "I have the documentation," I said. "It'll be there tomorrow," Lionel said from behind me. He had followed me down, apparently. I looked at the three of them in the evening light, Derek precise and contained and warm, Grant solid and certain, and here, Lionel with his second list and his 17 things and his quiet, extraordinary attention, and I thought about what Petra had said 3 months ago. "You've been fine for 2 years. You're allowed to want something that isn't fine." I was standing outside my office building at 7:30 on a Thursday evening with 3 men who had heard the worst 47 seconds of my recent memory and responded by rearranging themselves around me, and I was not fine, and I did not intend to manage it down to fine. I was, instead, something considerably better than fine. Something I was still finding words for. In the careful, deliberate way, I found words for things that mattered. Something that felt, the longer I stood in it, like exactly where I was supposed to be. "All right," I said. "Dinner." Grant opened the car door. Derek's hand came briefly to the small of my back, the gesture of a person who had been patient for a long time and was now, quietly, allowed to stop being patient. Lionel said, getting in. "I'm adding this to the second list." "What?" I asked, getting in after him. "The way you say all right when you've decided something." He settled in his seat. "It sounds different from your other all rights. More final, like a door closing on the not wanting." I thought about this. "Good," I said. "Close the door." He smiled the specific smile that wasn't quite a smile, the Lionel version, warm and precise and entirely real. The car pulled away from the building into the Thursday evening city, and behind us, the lights of Vantage Group receded, and ahead of us was wherever we were going, and I let myself be exactly where I was without managing the distance. The door was closed. Something better than fine had officially, finally begun.